Ichimon Japan is made possible by Patreon support. If you would like to make sure that we can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to JapanKyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Ryan, do you have any funny hats?
Yes, I don't know.
Welcome to Ichimon Japan. I'm Tony.
And I'm Ryan.
And it's been a while, but we're joined once again by someone we've had on the show at least a couple times, I think. Maybe like 2 or 3 times, maybe. But Lynn, welcome back.
Hello. I think this is technically my 3rd time.
Okay. All right. I know it was at least a couple times, but Lynn went to graduate school with us here at the University of Hawaii. We did a master's in Japanese language and linguistics, so we're all people that
Masters of Japanese linguistics.
Yeah, we are masters of Japanese language and linguistics, and yeah, like I said, we spent way too much time thinking about some of these language things. But today it's a language episode, so we wanted to have Lynn on because Lynn also has a bit of expertise on. Has done some research related to the topic that we will be discussing. So let's get to the question. Today's question is Japanese women's language an illusion? Woo, woo, woo. So that's the illusion sound effect that I did with my mouth.
I like the manual sound effects too.
Yeah. I don't just have a soundboard. I make sounds with my mouth too. So don't do those. People hate those sound noises.
It's becoming like a weird ASMR video.
Yeah. No. People will stop listening when you do that. They get very violent reactions when they listen to that sometimes. So all right. So first of all, this episode was inspired by a question that I got from a listener, probably at least 3 months ago. Because these episodes take forever to come out.
Is it inspired, or are we just literally answering that question?
We won't exactly answer the question because I don't think there's a simple answer to the question, but we will discuss stuff that I think will be relevant to what the individual wants to know. So let's stop beating around the bush. So Lynn, would you mind giving us kind of the main part of the email that I got?
Sure, let me read this. All right, here it goes. I was wondering if you had any tips, resources, or maybe even other content creators you could share on the subject, even if you yourself don't have the time to dedicate to make an entire episode about it. I'm a transgender woman, and from what I understand, the reception of gender nonconforming people is still kind of funky in Japan. And while I'm not sure when I'll ever get the chance to visit because of the responsibilities I have here in the United States, I'd really like to keep in mind things that would help both my studies and how I present myself to others.
Awesome. So this person was a listener, and I thought this was a great topic. We actually discussed kind of quote unquote men's language, that kind of thing, quite a while ago, and we had intended to discuss a bit more on the quote unquote women's language side of things, and so I thought okay, it's time we kind of address that. So we'll be discussing a little bit of that women's language, and just general kind of gendered speech. We've all done some research on this topic, I think, right? My capstone paper for grad school was kind of not related to this. And Ryan, you and I met in a sociolinguistics class in which we did read some papers on this topic as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that where we met?
And then, yeah, that was the first class we took together with. Well, it was a long time ago. Yeah, with someone who has done research on this topic extensively back in the day. But and then Lynn, you've also written and done research on topic generally related to this as well, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure we've all read a lot of the same papers.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, Lynn, do you want to I don't know, do you want to just jump in and kind of give a general thoughts on something here, and then of course we're gonna discuss some more specific things like pronouns and sentence ending particles and things like that. But I don't know if you want to just kind of give a general thought on the question at hand.
Sure. Yeah. So definitely. So I guess, right, a lot of learners of Japanese, they learn Japanese, and later on they like are like, oh, apparently women's language is a thing in Japanese, and then so they got kind of introduced into this whole new world of like ways that men and women talk differently, which, while it does happen in English as well, is not as different because in Japanese there are lexical differences and also just differences in um, ways that I think most men and women might interact with each other with using the language as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, and then, but obviously, right, every individual is different. So even if we say women's language, right, every woman's not gonna talk the same
Yeah.
way. Um, and so there's always gonna be like a stereotype, and people are either going to align with it or not align with it in different degrees, I think.
Yeah.
So definitely context and situation, and also who that person is talking to is going
Mhm.
to really affect how much this stereotypical women's language comes out in that person's speech, I feel
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I guess there are like kind of some of the big parts, right? Is going to be that women's language is going to be more polite
Mm.
in a way, right? And it's
Mhm.
also because it's more polite, and how you become more polite in Japanese is you become indirect. So
Mm.
having that's also like a characteristic, I guess, of women's speech as
Mhm.
well. But yeah, I feel like it's kind of easier though to pinpoint like specific things and talk about them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So just, well, I do just want to like really emphasize there, like what you said, like it really depends on the person and the context. So like, yeah, there are these things. It's like this quote unquote archetype of women's language, right? Like this is how a
Yeah.
woman should speak, almost like in this archetype, right? But I mean, some people may use certain features of that, but I think it's rare, or maybe I won't go to say like it's non-existent, but I would say it's pretty close to that. That like you're not going to come across a person that speaks like textbook women's language 100% of the time, from like the morning to the evening, no matter what context they're in, no matter whether they're like angry or sad or talking to their mom or dad. They're going to, even if they sound kind of quote unquote like feminine or whatever, like there's going to be moments where maybe they're going to speak a little different
Oh
from
yeah,
what would
definitely.
be stereotypically feminine. And and people also don't realize like how they speak, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why like surveys are horrible at this sort of thing. You have to like record people and see like what they actually say, because we've all had this. I think Lynn, I'm not sure. Oh geez, I'm not
Hmm.
sure if either of you were in the class when this happened, but there's this one teacher that we all had at one point, who was very adamant that's like she never said like a specific word. And then I mean, I can tell you who it was, but I think both of you will probably guess who it was. But um, and like later after the class, we like me and the other students in the class were like, we've heard her say that, like we know that she says that. So it's like
Yeah.
even like a sociolinguist, will have these ideas sometimes that's like, no, I don't speak a certain way. It's like, no, you do. We've heard you say this.
Definitely,
I had a
definitely.
friend who once swore he never used contractions in English because he was taught they were like, I don't know, improper English.
uh,
So for like the next week, I pointed it out every single time he did, and it was like almost every sentence.
yeah. So I'm sure there are some Japanese women that think, oh, I speak feminine all the time. And like you would record them like, oh, look, you just use like ore, you just use, I don't know, like, I'm just giving like random examples, but you can find like all sorts of things that wouldn't be classically considered, like feminine or whatever. So
Right.
yeah, it just,
And also
people
men,
aren't.
right? Men
Mhm.
using what is stereotypically women's language as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, people, humans just like to categorize into everything into neat boxes, and the only times that you get neat boxes are like, like cartoon characters almost, right? It's like the way oji-chan speak, like in Japanese, like all oji-chan like in cartoons like speak like oji-chan, but like actual like old men don't usually speak like cartoons.
The one that stands out to
Hopefully.
me is whoever writes the subtitles for like English movies with
Oh my
Japanese
God.
subtitles. Like, especially the female character, no matter how they speak, they're always going to end with like "desu wa" or something.
Yeah, yeah. Like, there's, I mean, the Ryan, the teacher that we had when we met, Reynolds. So she wrote an entire paper about like how, they would interview like foreign people on the street or some athletes or something, and then like the dubs and the subtitles would be like super feminine sounding, even though the people weren't, like, the women being interviewed didn't sound feminine when they were speaking English. They just sounded completely normal.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other thing. They're using these classically, like, features, the sentence final particles, to make them sound a certain way, even though to us, the native English speakers, like, I don't know, that doesn't match in my brain. Like, but anyway, yeah, there's tons we can say there. But like Liz said, I think it's a little bit easier to understand if we get into kind of the more specific details. So I think one of the things that a lot of people bring up, and it's one of the easiest places to start, is the first person pronouns.
Yes.
So,
yep.
Japanese has multiple pronouns. We've discussed them before, but we'll just bring them up briefly again. But you can kind of arrange them in a spectrum, I guess you could say. But Lynn, like, for example, would you want to like kind of give a general idea of like the idea of indexicality and how it's not just like masculine, feminine, like, but in a kind of easier to understand way?
Sure. You know what? I'll just use the first person pronouns as an example of that.
Yeah.
So, a lot of first person pronouns that people learn after watashi, which is the generally neutral informal situation first person pronouns, is so we'll have, for example, boku, right? And I think in a lot of textbooks, they'll introduce boku as the second first person pronoun that students learn. And they'll say it's used by boys. And then you might hear ore, and ore is often heard, right, as a kind of as the main character type of male character or assertive first person pronoun in a lot of shows. So like the Red Power Ranger will use ore, or like whoever is the lead in a action manga or anime will use ore, that kind of thing. And so kind of, I guess if we want to go for like a spectrum, right, we can have like ore on like ideologically the very masculine side, and then we have like boku, which is kind of like a softer masculine, and then if we want to go like watashi, which is in a formal situation is neutral, but in a casual situation is feminine, and then we have atashi, which is watashi with the first consonant w sound kind of dropped off, right, which is kind of the more feminine. But these categories of masculine and feminine are not because the words themselves are masculine and feminine, but for example, so ore, right, that was on the very, very far side of masculine. I've actually heard it used by an old lady in the countryside where I lived in. Right, and it was used very naturally, and this old lady wasn't trying to like be tough or anything. It was just what she used day to day.
She's actually retired yakuza, you just didn't know.
Oh yeah, actually, you know what? That would. Oh man, I should have thought of that. But yeah, so what it is though is that ore was just a first person pronoun that people in rural areas would use, and rural areas equals kind of being rough, right? Whether either rough or just not refined compared to the quote unquote city folk, right? Who were more like refined and higher class and things like that. So with that, ore wasn't necessarily at first a masculine first person pronoun. It was just a rough one, right? It's a rough, unrefined. But then rough and unrefined, those are two traits that ideologically Western society as well as Japanese society, right, can place into the masculine category. And so with that, masculinity, includes roughness and unrefinedness, and ore also includes roughness and unrefinedness. And so these kind of ideas overlap and signal each other. And so with that, ore started to become something that signaled masculinity of the rough and unrefined sort. So it's kind of like a Venn diagram that kind of came together and then became like almost a circle, right, of meaning. And then if we take a look on the other side, let's just go watashi. So watashi, that first pronoun that most learners use and learn, neutrally used in a formal situation is gender neutral, which means that it is formal. But women are expected to be more formal and polite even in casual situations, which means that if we change the environment to a casual situation and we have a woman using watashi, you're being formal in a setting where you don't have to be formal, and that kind of signals femininity a little bit, right? And with that, you can kind of see how that kind of can overlap in that casual setting. Actually, I think atashi is actually pretty interesting because this is seen as more feminine than watashi. But atashi is also more casual because it is a form of watashi that is quote unquote like a lazier way of saying it, right? You drop the
it's almost like contracted sound in a way, but the beginning is kind of chopped off.
Right. And so this is personally how I see it. So it might be different for other people, who see it. But so when you have something like that that's contracted, it's more casual, right? And in this case, usually being casual does signal masculinity, right? Casual speech. But in this case, though, it's not masculinity that's being signaled. It's actually youth and being younger. And femininity is also associated with being young in a way, right? Especially, I think, in Western and Japanese society, right? So young and feminine, right, are two traits that are, when they're together, a lot of people see as like an ideal in a way. And so with that, that's why instead of moving over to the more masculine side or even the neutral side, because it's more casual, it actually slides to the more feminine side because it's signals youth in a way. So, but these words by themselves, though, don't have the traits of masculinity and femininity. It's that they signal other things that are then put into masculine and feminine groups.
Yeah. And that's why, people manipulate language to, portray themselves in a certain way, because, it's not like, it's like this equals man, this equals woman. It's like you kind of piece together all these things in order to construct the person that you want to be perceived as. And
definitely,
that's also why it's really tricky to just say, okay, you are a man, you are a woman, you're a transgender man, you're this. So here's the list that you have to speak. It's like, it's not like a clear cut answer.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And people actually use many different pronouns throughout the day sometimes, right? Depending on who they're with, right? So for example, you might have a woman who like during, the office hours, she'll use watashi, but maybe she's with her boyfriend, right? She'll use atashi, right? To kind of maybe wants to show herself as being more feminine or like flirty or something like that. But then maybe in a situation where she wants to be completely neutral, we also use the word jibun as a very neutral. It just means oneself. And it's a pronoun that's not necessarily masculine or feminine because it's so neutral. And you can use, and so maybe she might use that as like giving a very like unbiased like viewpoint of something that she has to say, right? So with that, one person can definitely shift through, or I know some men where like at work when they're talking to the superiors, they'll use watashi. And then when they're talking to people the same age as themselves, they'll use boku.
Right.
But then when they're hanging out with their high school buddies, right, then they start using ore.
Right.
So definitely shifting and using the first person pronoun that you want to use to showcase yourself as how you want to showcase yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to switch between boku and watashi, but sometimes I'll throw in an ore, I guess, in certain situations, but mostly boku and watashi. So, I mean, it's just everybody's different. You gotta Like really, it comes down to almost like trial and error. You got to like kind of, sometimes you say something and you got a weird reaction and go like, okay, maybe I won't try that with this person. It's like,
I mean, they're kind of like linguistic hats you wear, right?
yeah,
Or like, little jackets you put on. So I want
yeah,
to show myself like this right now, or like this right now.
yeah,
Or like,
yeah,
oh, maybe this jacket looks really weird on me. I don't like it.
mhm.
Or like,
Yeah,
oh, this hat fits my head funny. It's not for
yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah. Ryan, do you have any funny hats?
Yes, I don't know.
I was literally asking about hats, but anyway.
I have a hat. I recently started wearing a hat.
Oh, nice. All right. It's not. I take it. It's not particularly funny.
No, it's just a black hat. It says
Oh,
Adidas.
okay. Okay. Well, I have one of those too. Then.
Is that the Watashi of hats?
Yes, it is. It is very the
it's the
Watashi
neutral.
hats. That's what it says in the
Yeah.
back.
Oh, okay.
The
Gotcha.
Watashi of hats.
Yeah,
That's also. That's how I forgot we needed to say that. Like in Japan, when you look at hat sizes, it will say "atashi, watashi, boku, ore."
Yes,
You
yes,
have to-
yes. You choose based on your pronoun.
Yeah. It's like, I need a watashi hat. It's like, here we have a Puma watashi. Here we have Adidas watashi. So anyway.
They always have an
so-
excess of washi hats. Like no one buys those ones.
Oh, yeah. No one wants the washi hats. Oh God. All right. Sorry. Washi's a whole other thing. That's the kind of stereotypical, almost like old man sort of, but it's more complicated than that, but whatever. We're not getting into that. So of course you get a similar spectrum with second person pronouns. I think, omae, teme, anata, anta, something, roughly like that, where anta is again, kind of the contracted, more feminine, childish almost in a way, or
Mhm.
almost like, I hear like when I'm watching TV and stuff, like I'll hear that like a woman saying that to like her husband or something, something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you get a similar thing, but I think more interesting than the second person pronoun might be to discuss the third person pronouns, because of course, like in the West, in the US, saying what pronouns you would like people to, what pronouns you use, and you want people to refer to you as, has become more and more common within recent years. And I think I've never seen somebody say something like that in Japanese. Have any of you?
Not that I'm
Yes.
aware
These are my
of.
pronouns.
I have.
You have? Oh, okay.
But mostly because it would be more at the pride parades.
Ah, okay.
Right. And it'd be like a Japanese person who is kind of aware of trending topics in the English world, right? That have to do with gender,
Yeah, they're
or
more
even
aware. Yeah.
right. Or even college students,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Who have taken so there's a lot of colleges right now, right, that like require students to take classes in English.
Mhm, mhm.
But some of the classes that are offered will be like gender studies classes and things like that. And so the professors will introduce that as something that is going on in the English speaking world. So I've definitely seen it here and there. And I've given a few talks to Japanese universities in the past year. So I've been more exposed to it, I believe, than like most other people.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's, I mean, I wasn't aware that you had given talks on it, but that's great. I mean, I know.
Well, I had to give talks about myself as the weird person I am, but as part of a professor's like kind of diversity course or things like that, and then they would ask me questions about pronouns and things like that. So, yeah, yes, but
so.
Do you think it's like a big issue in Japanese? Because in Japanese, I think most common for any person is just to not use third person pronouns at all.
Right. You can get around it completely by just saying like Tanaka-san or whatever,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think because of that, a lot of Japanese people don't think about third person pronouns because also, right, there's an overlap on meaning. Right, so kanojo as the third person pronoun for her, but kanojo also as the noun for girlfriend.
Yeah.
Right, and then kare, I guess you could say kareshi for like boyfriend, but like kare can also be boyfriend, and then kare can also be he. But then mostly you don't hear things like that unless the person who's talking about another person doesn't know the other person's name. And even then, right, like they'll use like that person, right, ano hito, or like ano kata, right, like instead of and then if they're not sure about the gender of the other person, then that's also when other substituted words are kind of used instead.
Yeah, like for example, in English, they them has there are there's an increasing amount of people that use that in a singular form, despite when you hear it out of context, your default would be to think it's plural, right? Like there's more than one person, but it's like, please call me they or them. Are you aware of something similar in Japanese, or is that just not a thing?
I mean, I think that there definitely are more people. There are people in Japan who, are non-binary. And then, but they don't, some people have been using the word non-binary in order to express that gender identity. But before that word entered the Japanese lexicon, many people would just use the word X-gender, right? With X just being like none, right? Okay. Like to cross it out kind of thing, right? Right. Or just like in general, like just like, yeah, I guess like a variable, right? But just like not like a mystery, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
There's not really a they them option, right? Because the plural third persons are not neutral in Japanese.
Yeah, we karera or kanojora or.
Well, I mean, karera, if there's
karera is
boy, it is gender neutral. Well, actually, so originally kare is a gender neutral pronoun. And so what happened was that during, I believe, either Meiji or that kind of when Japan started importing Western texts and started translating them, right, to use. Right, so like literature texts and medical texts and whatever like that. All these European languages had gendered third-person pronouns, but in Japanese it was just kare. And so with that, what they did was they just attached the kanji for woman onto kare, and so that's why kanojo is the kanji for kare and the kanji for woman. So kano onna, right? Or like, and then kano, and then instead of onna, jo. And that's why there's a no there, is because there is that no in kanojo is an unwritten particle no that ties together the kare and the onna kanji.
Okay. Yeah, I'd never bothered to look at that, but it makes total sense now. Okay.
Yeah. So we did have a gender neutral third person pronoun. It's just that due to European influence, right, and translation and things like that, we came up with a female third person pronoun. And then, in translation and stuff like that, it was useful to use them. And then people started reading it, right, and it came more into use. So.
Okay. There you go. Like English messed it up for everybody. So,
well, not just English, right? It was also like German and French.
Oh, true. Yeah. They were looking at Dutch.
So
and
it
all
was,
that stuff.
Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily like a English thing. It was just European languages.
Western European language. Yeah.
It's interesting that translation from other languages changed the root language, I guess, for Japanese society.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's the same with niyotte, right? The passive Japanese passive.
Yeah. I remember learning about some of those, how
that we didn't have before,
brought into. Yeah. Because they started translating, like you said, exactly what you said. They started translating stuff from the West, and so they had to come up with ways that were closer to some of the ways that things were being said in the West. And so some of these grammatical features that are used now today widely actually date back to that time period, probably Meiji-ish or maybe late Edo. I'm not sure, but around there.
So they've been doing this kind of like needlessly word for word direct translation for hundreds of years.
Yeah. It's not just a recent thing we see in t-shirts. It's actually a long-standing tradition. All right. So yeah, so that third person pronoun. So I mean, but yeah, like I said, just to repeat myself here, but the most convenient thing about Japanese is you don't really need them almost any time. As long as you know the
No.
person's name,
Yep.
you know, you
Yeah.
can just call them by the last name.
I think they're
And
kind
honestly,
of
like,
rare to use.
Yeah, it is.
yeah, because
It is.
it showcases something, right? Because it's rare, using it like marks it, it's like, oh, why are you using that? And it kind of calls more attention to it. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And same with like the second person pronouns, right? Like again,
mhm.
like if you're referring to somebody, like you're talking, I don't know, you need to get their attention or something. It's like, you know, Tanaka-san, you know, you might call them, or yeah, most of the time you're not going to be saying like omae or anata. Like again, like you just said, Lynn, it will mark
Yeah.
it as some sort of thing, like something out of the ordinary. Most of
even
the time,
even if you don't know their name, you're not gonna say like anata no namae wa nan desu ka, right?
Yeah,
Like
just
what
yeah,
is your name, right? You're gonna say
yeah,
o namae wa nan desu ka, right? And you're not even gonna
exactly.
use a second person pronoun because you're talking to the person. So it's
Mm-hmm.
obvious who you're talking to. So that's kind of one of the very nice parts about Japanese is like if the context is understood, you don't have to you don't even have to say nan desu ka, right? You can just say o namae wa, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's a hint for the other person to just give their name.
I'm just like imagining when you see like YouTube group discussions where it like has their name and it says like he, him, she, her, or whatever like underneath. If you translate that directly into like natural Japanese, it should be like Tanaka-san, pronoun Tanaka-san and Tanaka-san.
You look at the person's profile, it says Tanaka-san.
Like just
I
all
love
options
it.
would be Tanaka-san.
Just a pyramid of Tanaka.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I identify as Tanaka-san.
I mean, they probably do.
Yeah. I think I identify as Tony. Please call me Tony. Exactly. I think that's a very convenient solution instead of all this like gobbledygook and like all these like needless pronouns. Just call them by the name. Just call them by the name.
Actually, I use that to my advantage,
Uh-huh.
right? Because I teach Japanese as my day job as well.
Uh-huh.
And so, to my students, I always introduce myself with my name,
Uh-huh.
right? So, for example, like, if I was using my first name, right? Oh, hey, I'm Lynn, right? And I'd be like, my students call me Lynn Sensei. And so that's going to be my name, right? And so whenever they try to use any English titles, right? So like, Mr. Lin, I'd be like, that's not my name. And I just, oh wait, then Mrs. Lin, no, that's not my name. Miss Lin, that's not my name. You're trying all the titles, but then Sensei, that's my name. So
there you go.
I can definitely manipulate it. And I do manipulate it because of my job. So it's definitely great. My only other option would have to get a doctorate, but I feel like that's kind of a bit too much work for me.
It's a lot of work for. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't do it either, so we're on the same page there.
Me too.
We're all on the same page there. It's like we got enough with the masters. I think we got our fill. And in the process, you're teaching them something about how it would be in Japanese anyway, right? Like in Japan,
definitely.
You wouldn't have to worry about the Mr. or the Mrs. anyway. It's their Tanaka Sensei, right? That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know.
Yeah, and I'm like, just Sensei is fine too, because it's a title that can be used, right? It's a title that can be used as.
You don't even need to know name. You just call it by the like Omawari-san, like the policeman. It's like
I might have said this before, but it's not rare in Japan for students to not know their teachers' names.
It's just Sensei.
Yeah, just that one's Sensei, and that one's Sensei, and that one's the afternoon Sensei.
Like, okay, this really happened.
Sensei. Yeah. The health room Sensei.
Yeah.
Once I was walking, because we did the Ensoku, which is like the field trip where they like walk to a park, and I was talking with another English teacher and saying like, oh, it's so hard to learn every student's name because I teach the first, second, and third and had like 900 students. And she's like, oh, don't worry about it. Half of them don't know our names. And I was like, really? And then she just like grabbed some random kid who was standing there like, hey, you, like, what's your math teacher's name? And I was like, Sensei?
That's hilarious.
But it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
I had never really quizzed them. I think they know their homeroom teacher and like maybe the teachers they like, and then everyone else is just Sensei.
Yeah, they're just generic Sensei. Oh my god, that's pretty funny. Okay, so pronouns roughly. I mean, there's a really good article on tofugu.com that discusses this in more detail. We're not going to get into every little nitty gritty sort of thing about this, but let's discuss like the sentence final particles, because I think that's another important feature that can mark certain aspects of or I guess an entire sentence or and all that. But I don't know, Lynn, do you want to kind of introduce like a general idea here? Like
Sure.
Okay.
This is actually the root of one of the papers I wrote.
Oh, perfect.
So this is kind of a fun topic for me.
Yeah.
But so, so sentence or, phrase, final particles, they're, just, particles like our wa and ga and things like that, except for they go at the end and they don't necessarily have a quote unquote grammatical function, right? They actually have a more social function. And kind of show more like about how somebody feels about what they're saying. So one common one, right, is ne. So for example, so desu, right, that is so, right, technically. So ne, that ne right there is a particle that shows that you're either agreeing with the person that you're talking to, or that you're expecting the other person to agree with you, right? So it's a particle that shows kind of that there is alignment or commonality between the viewpoints of the two speakers. Right? On the other hand, another particle that is used is yo. And so yo, sorry, for example, ikuyo, like let's go, is kind of a particle that is, or actually maybe soyo, a better option. So soyo would be like a particle that shows maybe assertion that you know what you're talking about. So if somebody asks me like, are you sure that you parked your car over here? Right? And I'd be like, sodayo, I did park my car over here, right? So like I'm asserting that that's true, right? That is true. And so it's one that kind of is like from, it gives whatever I'm talking about kind of a authority. I give it kind of authority of its truth coming from myself, right? Which is different from the ne, because the ne is like agreement, right, between people. And then there's also another one. So like not at the end. So for example, so da na. And so that one, that na is kind of a stronger assertion. And I think a lot of people see it more as masculine because it's a stronger assertion than like ne or yo. And then another really, really famous one would be sentence final wa.
Wow, yeah.
And in this case, so if I was going to put on a voice, so da wa, right, is kind of that like, oh yeah, that is true. And that's also like an assertion, but it's like a soft assertion. And that's seen as very, very feminine, like that sentence final, phrase final wa. But the funny thing is that the wa that's seen as feminine, so people will be like, oh yeah, wa at the end of a sentence is feminine. And then you'll hear people speak and they'll have was at the end of sentences regardless of gender. But the only difference between this like typically feminine wa and then this like kind of more neutral wa is that the feminine wa, the intonation goes up.
Yeah.
So da wa. And then this gender neutral one, like shiran wa. Yeah. So that wa goes down.
Like I say that.
Yeah. So, and that's also an assertion. It's the same type of assertion, but because the intonation goes down, it's actually more of like a final. So like when the intonation goes down at the end in Japanese, it's more of like a final, more like a big period at the end, as opposed to like an upwards intonation, which kind of leaves things open-ended. And so that actually factors into whether the wa becomes either feminine or neutral or not.
Yeah, and then like you can combine that feminine wa with the yo and the ne, and then that gives that like, quote unquote feminine, softer sort of a vibe to whatever the person is saying.
Right.
but again, like it's a linguistic tool that some people choose to use, and but not all women. I would say most of the time, most women don't sound like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Unless you live in an anime.
Unless you live in an anime full of like ojo-sama, like rich girl, like almost like spoiled girl characters, where like that is the stereotypical like speech pattern.
Unless somebody else is writing your lines.
Oh yeah, I guess unless you're being subtitled. Then it's every woman, no matter how they're speaking.
Yeah.
They could just be screaming in anger, like wah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Xena, totally femme.
But
oh really?
Wah.
Well, Xena. Oh man, so Xena got very girly.
Actually, I have no idea. I should look up the subtitles for Xena. That'd be hilarious.
I just want to watch Xena again. I haven't seen that in like 20 years.
Yeah, well, nor have I. It's been a very long time. But
next episode, what does Xena talk like in Japanese?
Xena, どんな喋り方するわ? Yeah, it would not surprise me because as we discussed, there's plenty of examples that you see even today in Japanese media or in Japanese like dubs of movies, English language movies, whatever, like, you know, just a normal like woman that doesn't sound particularly feminine will start throwing around was and kashiras and hatashis, and you know, she sounds like this, I don't know, out of like a Japanese soap opera sort of like, you know, high class woman or something.
Right.
Yeah. And actually that is a little bit of some of the association where some of this quote unquote women's language came from. You know, it's like high class women should kind of speak this way. And, you know, so there was this idea that this sort of type of woman should speak this way, and thus that kind of bleeds into the rest of the society. And people that are not of that strata necessarily, then they have to kind of adopt those speech patterns, perhaps when they're working, you know, in the office or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're not going to get into too much into the particles beyond this because that is really a deep rabbit hole. But yeah, like I've done some research on that too. And, you know, there's a lot of intonation that goes into that. You know, even with ne, like I did a little bit of, well, my capstone was on like looking at intonation patterns between women and men with ne. And I didn't, it was definitely not enough data, but I did find a little bit of a tendency for some of these female like news commentators that I was looking at to use ne in a more like rising tone in order to get more agreement from the host. But again, small sample data, but that's what I found in my thing. So, you know, even within ne, there could be some differences depending on the context in you know, women and men, how they're using it. And then of course we also have, you know, people, like, you know, men who perhaps, you know, gay men or, you know, transgender that are using some of these, you know, linguistic tools in order to, you know, again, construct the identity that they identify as, right? So they may not be biologically, they may not have been born as a man, but, you know, they're using that in the context. So that's why this is so complicated. Like there's no like simple answer. But basically, yeah, I think, I don't know if I can sum it up as you need to just kind of be aware of these things. And then it comes down to using it and experimenting. Like it's just one more aspect of language. It's like, it doesn't matter if it's the gender side of things. Like, you know, there's other aspects of like, for example, you know, one time I said, benjo instead of toilet in Japanese. They go like, oh, okay, yeah, bench is kind of weird. Like people don't really use that word in Japan these days. You know? So, you know, it's not something related to gender, but it's this kind of thing. It's like sometimes you throw out a word and you go like, oh, that wasn't the reaction I was expecting. And so it does take a lot of like experimentation to find what feels right for you in any given circumstance.
And it also depends on where you are, since so for example, you know, I think that you could find, so like, you can also have lexical differences, right, between stereotypical genders. So one example is like taberu for to eat versus ku, to eat. And they both mean to eat, and they both use the same kanji to eat as their kind of root, right? But
Mhm.
taberu is very neutral, right? Very modern. Most people use it. Ku is, you don't hear it very often, but if you do, it's seen as a cruder version of it, right?
Mhm.
And ku is kind of, even though it just means to eat, right? The image of ku is maybe not as refined, right? Maybe like you might imagine somebody being like a messy eater, maybe even,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
For ku. So you could, like, kuisugita, like, I ate
Mhm.
too much, right? But like the
Mhm.
implication is like it was like shoveled down maybe a little bit quickly, right?
Mhm.
But tabesugita is just I ate too much, but it's very
Mhm.
neutral,
Mhm.
right? But if you go into more the countryside, right, then you're gonna hear like teenage
Mhm.
girls being like, "Kuh," like, "Oh, hey, you want some? You want some to eat?" Like if they have
Mhm.
like maybe
Mhm.
candy or like they want to share something right with you, right? And it's because we're
Mhm.
in the countryside where rougher speech is more accepted as part of the local speech style because
Yeah.
it's rougher people because you're in the countryside, right? So you have
Yeah.
a lot
And
of
like
people who are
dialectal
farmers or,
too, sort of
oh yeah,
thing. Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Like, I mean, even with the wa thing, right? Like, I get the impression that I think it's like Kansai people. That wa, that like falling intonation wa, I think had its origins in the Kansai area, if I remember correctly. I think I heard
I
that
do
somewhere.
believe that a lot of people in the content area do use that falling law, and
Yeah.
then through media, because right,
Yeah.
a lot of comedians are from the Kansai region. It kind
Right.
of became a kind of passed around the country and then adopted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like one example of a, I guess, a type of female that doesn't kind of abide by these sort of linguistic norms that comes to mind is like gyaru, right? Like especially like 90s gyaru.
Oh yeah.
They're like super, like so like rough, and they'll say stuff like "ku" and all these things like all this vulgar kind of stuff, and then but they'll throw in like their super cute like slang too. So it's
Yep.
this really like iconoclastic sort of thing. It's like they're being quote unquote masculine, but they're also inventing like some of these most classically like quote unquote like immature girly girl sort of language too, and they're like plastering it all together, and it's this whole, and you look at a girl and you're not thinking like, oh, she looks masculine. It's like, no, they look, I mean, by they're wearing short shorts and all this stuff, it's like they look
Got
classically
nails.
feminine.
Got
The nails and
eyelashes.
yeah, and then the makeup and the jewelry, but at least a good portion of their speech sounds like you're talking to some like rough guy, like like
Yeah,
I don't
if
know,
you
those
wrote
guys
it
in
all
whatever.
out, right? If you wrote
Yeah.
it all out, you could be like, okay, this part is masculine, quote unquote masculine. This part is
Mm-hmm.
masculine, and then when you hear it, though, right, the intonation and the pitch, right,
Mm-hmm.
is not going to maybe necessarily mark it as masculine, even especially if you hear it without knowing any Japanese.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, that's a really funny point because so with gay male speech,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually very similar
Mm-hmm.
in which so one of the facets of gay male speech is like the usages of for example the stereotypically feminine first person pronouns, second person pronouns, right, like atashi,
Mm-hmm.
watashi, right, but then they'll be using lexical terms that are maybe considered vulgar, right, so
Mm-hmm.
they might say something like atashi geridawa, right, which
Mm-hmm.
is literally like, oh, I got diarrhea,
Yeah.
right? Which is using the word diarrhea,
A common pickup line in
is not
Japan.
necessarily a very feminine thing, but they're using a feminine first person pronoun and a quote unquote feminine, sentence final particle. And then they're using the word getty, but then maybe a more feminine woman would choose to just say, oh, my tummy hurts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, or like, oh, it's,
I've got the runs.
right, oh yeah, yeah, right. Or like,
Sorry, no. I couldn't help
yeah,
myself. Sorry.
yeah. But but things like that, right? So like there's that lexical choice, but with some gay men, they'll be
Yeah.
using um all of the feminine little bits, but then
Yeah.
out of nowhere, bam, like a really crude word,
Yeah.
right? And that's how they're showing, oh, I'm feminine, but I'm not a girl. Right?
Yeah.
That's how they're playing around and picking and choosing language to present themselves as a man, but
Mm-hmm.
this type of man.
Right.
Right.
One with Getty.
Yeah. One with Getty.
Apparently, yeah, that one. Yeah. No
Yeah.
one's going home with him that night.
Maybe that's the coded speech. Like he just wants to go home alone and rest. It's like, yeah, Getty done.
True. Yeah, that's the
Like,
implication.
don't try to pick me up.
Yeah, not tonight. Maybe tomorrow, but not tonight.
Also, literally, don't try to lift me up.
Yes, something might come out. Oh God, sorry.
Cover all your bases.
Oh, jeez.
Okay. Enough with the below the belt humor. Yeah. And this is a great tool for humor as well. Yeah, it's when you play with those expectations too. It's like you could really have some fun with it. So I'm sorry to our listener. We don't have a nice clear cut answer, but I would just say keep studying. Find those things that you think apply to you and just keep experimenting. That's kind of language in general, but I mean, when it comes to who you want to be seen as, I think that's particularly important. Lynn, do you want to kind of add something to that, to anybody that's kind of thinking about that?
I think also like as a language learner, right? Or even, I think as us as, small children learning our first language, right? Is that a lot of times we kind of mimic the people we admire, right? And we kind of talk like them, right? Or we try to talk like them. And then we kind of experiment with talking like different types of people. Yeah. And in the end, we find our own voice, right? In a way. And I think as a language learner, regardless of what type of language you're looking to acquire, right, is, especially, right, if you are like transgender, and maybe you've been taught to speak one way in Japanese because that's just the, kind of education that your teacher assumed that you wanted. But then actually you're interested in speaking a different way. Then maybe finding somebody right, that kind of encompasses how you would like to present yourself in Japanese, right? Whether that be like, and obviously, like it doesn't have to be somebody whose gender matches yours in a way, right? It can just be like, if, for example, like you can have somebody who you want to mimic as a formal speaker, right? Or maybe somebody that you want to kind of align with as a casual speaker, that kind of thing. And in this day and age, right, YouTube is amazing. You can see lots of different ways that people talk and lots of different ways that people present themselves. And so definitely there are a lot more, queer YouTubers than there were before. And you can definitely take a look and see what kind of first person pronouns people are using, what kind of, sentence final particles people are using, what kind of lexical decisions they're making in order to kind of talk about what they want to talk about. And then also know that like people shift how they talk all the time, right? And so how a Japanese kid, regardless of gender, right, talks at 15 is going to be very different from how they talk at 25, which is going to be very different from how they talk at 40. Right. And that's just because they're going to have life experiences that shape the way they want to present themselves to the world. So, I think with that, just kind of play around with it, right? Language is to be used and to be played with and to do stuff with. And, if you need, you can see if you can find somebody, right, who in maybe the community that you are in, who might be someone you can kind of use as a model until you maybe find something else or until you feel like you've learned what you wanted from them. And then just go on, right? And just, and then I think that's a pretty good way to find your voice in Japanese.
Yeah. No, that's great. There's so much content out there. And a lot of the good stuff is, the good thing is that a lot of it is very casual, very frank content. I've come across some YouTube channels done by, queer individuals in Japan. And, it can be like, they're just telling their personal story and you hear them, and it's like very natural language. So it's a wonderful, wonderful like resource, to really just like listen, stop, you write it down, you think about maybe why they said it in that certain way. Once you get to a certain level, you can start to kind of like analyze what you're hearing. So I think, if you do a little digging on YouTube, there's so much great stuff that can be used as a resource. And then one last thing is, your Japanese teacher may have no freaking clue about any of this.
I think there's a high chance of
a
that.
lot of native speakers. Yeah. A lot of native Japanese speakers may have like no freaking idea about any of the stuff that we just talked about. They just know what's in the textbook, and you're a 20-year-old girl. Okay, here's the textbook says Genki says this, so here you go. And so, be respectful in the classroom, sure, but just be aware that they may not be aware that there are Japanese, women or men that don't abide by what Genki says or what any of these textbooks say. So yeah, that's why it's so important to really like try to absorb natural language and see what people actually say. And then like Lynn said, you can find those sources that you can start to mimic and try to, experiment with. Because I've definitely heard stories from, I don't know, maybe read or heard, it's like some Japanese teacher says like, no, people don't say this, or, no, you should not say this. And it's like, no, people do that. It's like, yeah, it's not. Yeah. So there's definitely plenty of examples of that happening. So in that situation, you just go, okay, sensei. And then, you do it, outside of the classroom.
Definitely. Yeah. And then I guess one more thing is for anybody, who's listening, who like wants a deeper dive into kind of this gendered language kind of thing. I definitely do recommend if you can to read up on Professor Nakamura Momoko, who is a big name in Japanese language gender studies. So she does a lot of things on women's language and things like that. And she does have books out in English as well, which is why I would recommend her. I think she has 2 books out in English, or one or 2 books out in English.
Yeah, 1 or 2. I forgot how many, but yeah, we all love her. We all know her personally.
Actually, I missed her. I did not get to meet her.
Oh, really? Oh, you did come. I think
she was
end of our time, right?
I came the year after she left, I believe.
Yeah, Tony and I
she left,
took
and then
2 classes with her.
Yeah, I took it. Well, we took that one, the class where we met. She was in it, and she is just so funny, such a like upbeat, smart, but just also funny and energetic. She's almost like a Kansai comedian, almost like, she's a great person, but also. Like Lynn said, she's written extensively on this topic, and
so read her books. But if you have the chance, also like go out to dinner with her.
Yeah, which we have multiple times, and it was all great. So
we had like a yakiniku farewell party, didn't we?
That's the thing I'm the most jealous about that I did not get to do that you guys got to do.
We should all go to Yokohama and try to meet up with her. So that's Momoko Nakamura. I forgot the title of her latest book, but she's got 1 or 2, so you can look.
I think she has one out. Also, 2014, Gender, Language, and Ideology, the Genealogy of Japanese Women's Language, and then recently in 2020, she has a publication called Shin Keigo Maji Yabaisu. So new honorific Maji Yabaisu.
All right. So, Ryan, is there anything you want to add, or are we good to finish up?
Well, I can either finish here or talk for 6 more hours. Which one do you want?
We'll leave it for the patrons then. A 6-hour rant of Ryan just talking about like why cows should use a certain pronoun.
Yes, that is exactly my topic, and it's only for the $10,000 tier patrons.
Yeah. So, guys, I think you're going to get your money worth. So, Get the 10K out, because Ryan's going to go on a tirade. All right. Sorry. All right. So yeah, if you have any questions you want us to address like in 6 months, you can do that. You can send us an email to, I think it's, I'm not even going to say what I think it is. Anyway, mail@japanstationpodcast.com. Use that other one because I can't remember right now. I think it's Ichimon, whatever. Don't worry. Mail@japanstationpodcast.com, or join the Patreon and you can just DM me directly. Yeah. Anyway, so we'll leave it at that. Subscribe, leave a review, blah, blah, blah. Lynn, thank you so much for adding to this conveation.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for linning.
Enriched this greatly. Thank you. Thank you for linning.
You're a very good linner.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad.
Lynn says
it'd be so awkward if I was named that and I wasn't.
I've met people who are like that, and it is always kind of sad.
Wait, who were like what?
Like their name is like John, but they're more of a micer.
I'm lost. What?
The things I say don't make a lot of sense.
Okay. Anyway, so Lin Sensei, thank you. Ryan Sensei, thank you. And we are out. See you next time.